We all grieve differently. So sure, there are the well-known stages of grief that are well documented, but we all go through that process in a slightly different manner. And for me, for a long time, I've learned to basically deal with it on my own terms and what works best for me. And in most cases, that boils down to when the news of somebody you care for passing away, when you receive that news, is to very consciously accept that fact and the emotions that you know will come with that event happening. Meaning, obviously, in many cases, if it's unexpected, there is shock and and disbelief and all those things. That's not what I'm talking about. What I mean is to very consciously make the effort of staring that fact into the face and making a conscious effort to accept it and let the feelings of loss overwhelm you, or if not overwhelm, at the very least come over you completely, so that you don't suppress those feelings and then they hit you later on. That has been my way for many years, and I found it to be more effective than all the alternatives that I found. So when I heard the news of Dan passing a few days ago, I took that time again to very consciously think about the fact that my teacher's gone. He's no longer with us. And had a lot of thoughts, went through my archives of all the pictures and so on that I have of Dan, and gathered my thoughts a bit. And that's why I'm doing this podcast episode for many reasons. On the one hand, it's part of that process that I use to help me grieve when people fall away, but also reaching out to Dan's family, in particular his children, to convey my condolences, obviously, but also to share some of the information as to how knowing Dan and having him as a teacher and a friend has touched my life. I've done this several times before with other people who not necessarily needed to hear this, but that the information that you share, like this is how your father had an impact on my life, a very significant one, and how grateful I am for what he did. And here's what he thought of you and how much he loved you. So I've done this several times throughout my life, especially the last few years as I'm getting older and obviously more regularly people fall away. So that's what I want to do now. It's remembering Dan and most of all, sharing some stories for his family, his children, but also the entire Practical Tai Chi Chuan international community, which are my Tai Chi brothers and sisters and uncles and aunts and so on. So this is for a bunch of people. It's not just for me. So I'll talk more before I go on. I really quickly have to do some housekeeping for the podcast. So very quickly, I'm making a few changes. So the first change is that there will be more regular episodes. I'm shooting for once a week. I have two main categories now of episodes. The first one is interviews. A guest comes on and we talk. Second category is me talking about a subject. And both of these usually go relatively long, at easy anywhere beyond half an hour to an hour or much more. Now, I wanted to do more regular updates, but I don't necessarily have more time to do long form content, even though I very much enjoy doing that. And I think it's the most worthwhile content to create, where you can be more nuanced in your approach. But I wanted to do something that is also easier to do and is a little bit different, and that would be relatively short form content, meaning 15 minutes, maximum 30 minutes, but hopefully sticking to the 15-minute or 20-minute mark for all the times when, it's just not necessarily that you want to go in depth, but just share some thoughts about topics. The setup is this. I have a Facebook group, had it for a while. It's called You Are Not Aries, Aries God of War. And what I'll do is just take some of the stuff that gets discussed there and then share my thoughts on the subject. In the group, usually I'm the moderator. I don't engage enormously. It's not about me, it's about the people there, giving them a forum to discuss things in a productive manner, as opposed to a lot of the nonsense you see online. And I just wanted to take some of the really interesting stuff that is said there and share it on the podcast in a relatively short form format. So that's coming. Next update is the YouTube channel, in which I've posted all my podcast episodes. Usually that was just the logo of the podcast and then the audio file. As you can see right now, I've got a really great webcam that I received as a gift from She Who Must Be Feared, and I can use that now to record good audio and video quality at the same time. So what I'll do is separate the podcast from my main YouTube channel and give it its own channel. So if you follow the podcast, or you want to follow and watch the video feed, which is usually me talking, but when I do interviews, I usually also have the video of the guest, and then you can see the guest talking as well. So that will be on a separate YouTube page. When all that is said and done, you will find updates to that very easily on my blog, wimsblog.com. For the show notes for this episode, so all the things that I'll mention, I'm going to share a link. Go to wimsblog.com/72, the numbers 72, it's episode 72, and all the links will be there, Dan's stuff and so on. So that's all the housekeeping that's done. The main topic for today, so Dan Docherty, the head instructor of the style that I practice, passed away a few days ago. Dan was suffering from Parkinson's for a while, that is well known, but it looks like he had a heart attack. That's the most likely explanation. We'll probably know more in a few days, but that's not really relevant right now. Point is that he's gone, and the rest of us now have to move on, and move on in the sense that, you know, deal with our own feelings about this, and basically try to, in my opinion, further the work that he started. And I'll get to that in the end. But a little bit of an explanation. So most people know me from my blog that I've been doing for several decades now, martial arts, self-defense, and so on. Some of my books or my videos from Paladin Press back in the day. So a lot of people know me from that. But I've been a Tai Chi Chuan practitioner and teacher for much longer than that. That's been my main style for the past 25 years. It's a style in which I've invested the most time and effort. When last year, when the lockdown started, almost 2 years ago now, I started my online taichichuan.com membership site, which is basically, I wasn't allowed to teach. We were in lockdown, and I basically started making instructional videos, in depth, really detailed. We've got, I think, over 100 videos right now, many dozens of hours of instructional material. And it was mostly for my students, but also for other folks at Practical Tai Chi Chuan International who were in the same boat. We weren't allowed to go to classes, but we still wanted to train. So, and that's what I made. And a lot of people were surprised, like, wow, aren't you that self-defense guy? What are you doing Tai Chi for? And when I got those reactions, I laughed, because I remember having a similar reaction before I started with the training. I'll explain that in a bit. So, and again, all the links to the Tai Chi Chuan site is going to be in the show notes. You can find it there. But point is this. To talk about Dan, I first have to give the background of how I got started training in his style. And that's in 1997 is when I started. What I did back then, my main job is still being a personal trainer. I had a client who worked just outside of Zaventem, which is very near Brussels. And over lunch, I'd pick him up, we'd go to the gym, work out, and then at the end of the workout, we'd do some martial arts, some sparring and stuff in the back of the aerobics room in that gym. Now, we've been doing that for a while, and I got friendly with the owner. We started talking, and he was like, well, okay, you do that martial arts thing. And I explained what I was doing. And they said, oh, Chinese martial arts. Well, it says, we have a Tai Chi class here every week. And I said, yeah, but Tai Chi's for old people, it's all good for health, but I'm too young for that. And he said, no, these guys fight. And immediately my interest was piqued, and I said, okay, interesting. So a little while later, I showed up for class. Patrick Couder, my main teacher, is a teacher there, and very welcoming, very friendly, and it was a great class, and everything was fine. I found the style to be interesting. But the real eye-opening moment was when we did freestyle pushing hands, which is, you can compare it to some sort of, wrestling. There's different ways of doing it. The goal in this particular exercise that we were doing was to stand in front of each other and try to break the balance of your partner without losing your own balance. Now, I had already done a fair amount of competing. I competed in Sanda, Chinese kickboxing, at a fairly high level, and I was pretty strong, in great shape. And here's this guy who's almost half my size, and I'm a heavyweight, so he wasn't a big guy. And the harder I tried to break his balance, the quicker I ended up on the ground. And I was like, okay, this doesn't make any sense. I could literally pick that guy up and throw him across the room. That would have worked, but that was not what we were doing. So the more brute strength that I used, the faster I ended up on my butt on the floor. Obviously, my ego was a little bit bruised because this small guy was basically manhandling me. That was my first reaction, but luckily for me, my second reaction was the realization that, okay, this guy's half my size. He's not even the best guy in class. He's by far not as good as a teacher, and he can do this to me. What can I do to other people if I get just to this guy's level, let alone the teacher's level? So I was very much intrigued by the style and just wanted to learn immediately. I signed up for class, and that was 25 years ago, and I'm still training. So that was my introduction to Tai Chi Chuan as a martial art, because that was what I learned there. Lesson 1 was doing, yes, the forms, yes, the pushing hands, all those things, but also the self-defense applications. And I discovered a style that really fit the way I view self-defense, and I'll talk more in a bit. So that's where I started. And then only a few weeks later, there was a seminar with Dan Docherty, the head instructor of the style, whom I didn't know. I didn't know much about him. I was new to the style. And don't forget, this is before the internet was big. This is a long time ago. So there wasn't as much information as there is now. So for those of you who practice our style, I had only learned the short form up to single whip, which is one of the first moves in the form. So Dan actually showed me cloud hands, the move that comes after that. So I was very, very new. The seminar went great, and Dan was very impressive in the way that he moved and some of the things he showed, and I really liked his approach to teaching. But one of the eye-opening moments of that seminar was when we did Rolling Thunder Hand, which is sort of like a mini system that we have. And what we did there is also the conditioning part. And that's like, I'm not quite sure how long it was, but it was like anywhere from, I think, 10 or maybe even 15 minutes of non-stop punching that we did. And it's like shadow boxing, but just non-stop for 10-15 minutes. We passed around the hand weights. They're about, I think, 1 kilo, 2 kilos, I don't remember how much, but just like hand weights that you had to hold on while you were punching. And we passed them around. After a few minutes, the next person needed to use them. That makes it even more of a tiring drill. But the point is that it's a conditioning exercise, and it was very far removed from what most people think Tai Chi actually is. So that was for me also an eye-opening moment, because I realized that, okay, this is the kind of training you do to be better at fighting, at using techniques for self-defense, where it's not just going through the motions, but actually using conditioning. I later on discovered that there were many conditioning drills that we did. that were very different from what I saw in other schools, and very effective also. So that was my first introduction to Dan, and then time went by. I just dove head first into the style, and trained really, really hard. A while later, I did Baishi with Dan, so that's like sort of a ritual in which, a very traditional ritual, well known in Chinese culture, in which you become accepted by the teacher as a student, as a disciple, if you will. I've talked about this before, I'm not going to rehash it here. But one of the important moments about that for me was that Dan, in his own way, said that, I'm paraphrasing, but he said you have the potential to reach a very high level in Tai Chi if you want. And this is not about me boasting. The point is this: for me, that was like, okay, that's great to hear, because as a teacher myself, I know how often that I see people coming to class who are really talented. I've seen that dozens and dozens of people over the many decades that I've been teaching, who are really talented, that could go really far, but for whatever reason, it just never materializes, because they have other things in their life, because maybe it's not exactly for them, despite their talent, because of what have you. And the talent just never reaches its full potential. So when I heard him say that, I thought, okay, so that means the teacher thinks that I might actually have a shot at being good at this. Now it's on me. So, and that's why I mention it, because it made me realize that I now need to train very hard to not disappoint Dan, and to live up to what he sees in me. And I trained even harder and never stopped. So that was for me, again, a watershed moment, because it meant that the style that I practiced before, I understood that it was incompatible with the Tai Chi that I was learning, and I needed to stop doing that style. That previous style, Hung Chapai, that I was teaching and training, again, long story there, but the compatibility just wasn't there. Which goes to show that, I mean, the effectiveness of the style that Dan was teaching, and the inherent consistency it had, meaning that it was a consistent style. The different pieces stuck together well. It made sense to me. It meant that I couldn't do dual training. I had to go all in on his style, which I did. And relatively soon after that, I asked my teacher, would it be okay to teach? And then Dan, he talked to Dan, and then we organized a seminar in Belgium. And Dan kind of tested me during that seminar, again, in his own way. We talk. He'd ask me questions as we were doing pushing hands exercises. For instance, it started when we did Fuyang, bow down, look up. It's a pushing hands exercise, in which you take turns pushing each other and testing and a bunch of stuff. And then instead of doing it the way we normally do, which is you push down on your partner and slide your hands down, he would kind of bounce the strength of his push into my body, and I'd get shocked back and down. And basically he was testing my structure, as he was just asking me questions and doing so in a very relaxed manner. And I was just getting crushed underneath his push, while I was trying to maintain the conversation at a coherent level. So that was the first test, and I guess I passed, because we did some more. And I'll talk about more in a little bit, but it was also the first time that I truly experienced how great he was as a martial artist, how incredibly skillful he was. So the end result of that is that he accepted, my request, and I was allowed to teach. That was many, many decades ago, and I'm still here. Obviously, I started reading everything Dan wrote, all his books. They were well written. He's got a sharp pen, meaning that he launched a few jabs left and right to certain people. Some of them I know who it was, because he told me, or because I already knew via other people. The books are, in my opinion, pretty well structured and organized, which is something I, as an author myself, very much enjoy. It's very annoying to read a book that is all over the place and has no structure. It's very confusing, and that was never the case with Dan. So he had a very methodical approach to writing, which I really like. But most of all, there were so many references to all the many aspects that a lot of Western teachers of Tai Chi don't know, or they misunderstand things. And this refers to something he wrote, I think, in an article or in a book review, I don't remember, but he said that many Western practitioners don't speak Chinese or don't speak Chinese well, and or they don't know enough about the language or culture to understand certain things. And on the other hand, many translators maybe have excellent Chinese language skills, but they don't know enough martial arts and self-defense to really understand the topic in their translations of books and videos or what have you, or during interviews, or when a Chinese teacher explains something and they have to translate for the students. So it becomes very difficult sometimes to truly get the art passed on correctly from a different country and culture into ours. And in that regard, Dan was a very unique blend of somebody with a tremendous amount of martial arts and self-defense knowledge and actual experience using it. He had a law enforcement background, was a Hong Kong police officer for many years, but also having this cultural and historical knowledge of China itself and its martial arts in particular. And I've never found anybody else who came close to that particular combination of all these factors together in one person, which is what made him unique. So that said, so for those of you who don't know Dan, a little bit of backstory very quickly. He started with karate when he was young, went to Hong Kong to learn Tai Chi. He became a police officer in the Hong Kong police force, an inspector. He competed full contact fighting, Southeast Asian Chinese pugilistic championships. He won that, representing Tai Chi, and had a law degree and a postgraduate diploma in Chinese. Dan spoke and wrote fluently Mandarin and Cantonese. He could translate historical books and texts, poetry, did calligraphy and so on. He also spoke French. So he was a pretty intelligent person. And he created Practical Tai Chi Chuan International, which is a very large organization. I think there's about 120, 130 teachers in the organization right now. So in Europe, it's one of the largest, and I'm a part of that organization. And that was his life's work. So he dedicated his life to the promotion and furthering on the knowledge that he learned from his Tai Chi Chuan teacher. That's just a bio, but obviously there's more. And one aspect is that Dan was a controversial figure. Now, I have absolutely zero issues with that because in many cases, many of my previous teachers and teachers from other styles were also controversial figures. You can't be good at something that there won't be people who will hate your guts for it. But Dan was an outspoken critic of nonsense and frauds. Now, again, I have to remind you that this was before the internet and YouTube and all of those things. I'm of the generation where we were lucky enough that VHS tapes, cassette tapes were available and becoming more mainstream, and that we had to look for instructional videos that way. Now you just open up your cell phone and you've got YouTube, and you're just flooded with training information and so on. That wasn't the case back then. What that meant is that a lot of people made a lot of claims that were not quite right, to say it in Dan's words. A lot of people made up things that Dan knew were made up and so on. And for the average person, there was no way to check if something was real or not. Again, there were no records, or there was no cell phone footage, that just didn't exist back then. And he had absolutely no problem calling these people out to their faces if need be. You can imagine how well that went for those people, and how very much they disliked him for that, because he was kind of messing up a good business they had going. So from what I saw, a lot of the controversy came from those kind of incidents. There's one that is well known, Dr. Shen, sorry, and the water bottle. Long story short, Dr. Shen was making claims that he had empty force. Empty force is one of those things in which people claim to be Jedi Knights, meaning they can use the force and from a distance affect you. So they can move you or hit you or manipulate you without actual contact, without touching you. It's a lot of nonsense, obviously, but apparently Dr. Shen made a lot of claims then, and some of the students of Dr. Shen got into this back and forth in, you know, articles in magazines and newsletters and letters to the editor and what have you. Again, I'm oversimplifying, but that's kind of what happened. And basically, the students of Dr. Shen said, okay, you just show up at the seminar, and you'll see, which Dan did. And he showed up and basically said, look, I've got the money right here. You say you have empty force. Okay, I'm coming. Stop me with your empty force. Dr. Shen was sitting there at a desk or at a table, then slowly walked up. He said this in Chinese so that Dr. Shen obviously could understand him. He walked up and paused for a second and then poured a bottle of water over Dr. Shen's head, who was unable to use his empty force to stop Dan. Now, a lot of people were, and then Dan left, and a lot of people were outraged over this. A lot of people laughed. That includes me. I understand the outrage. I understand why some people found that disrespectful. My view on it is that, well, here's the thing. If you make wild claims about certain abilities, it's up to you to prove it. That's one aspect. The other thing is this. If you make those wild claims and somebody calls you out on them, in particular, if you invite those people to show up at your event, well, don't be surprised if they don't really, follow your way of doing things, meaning that they will confront you on their own terms. If you don't want people to do that, don't make claims and then invite people to come on over. That just doesn't make sense to me. So for those of there's still people who are very upset about that, apparently. And for me, it's like, well, if you want to believe in empty force and Dr. Shen, by all means. I've met my fair share of empty force guys. There was one guy that showed up at a seminar and then absolutely wanted to train with me. And because it was a friend of a friend, I said, okay. And he made all these claims of empty force. And I said, do it. He said, I'm right here, hit me. Yeah, but I can't really control it. Sometimes happens, sometimes it doesn't happen. So I said, well, if you can't control it, what's the use? I mean, if you don't know when it will work for you, what's the use of actually training something that is unreliable? That just makes zero sense. We pushed hands. I pushed him around. He got upset because he had a hard time. He said, you're using too much muscular strength. I replied, it should be very easy for you then to beat me if I'm only using muscular strength, because the essence of Tai Chi is that you use brute strength against the attacker. So I said, look, it should be easier for you. He said, yeah, but we don't do push hands the way you do it. We do it differently. I said, fine, let's do it your way. And he started striking, which is the opposite of what you do in push hands, but I was fine. And I kicked him in the face, swept him to the floor, and we were done. And he didn't want to play anymore. So and that's one example, and this is not about me being so awesome. It's just that the folks like Dr. Shen and the no-touch guys are out there. There's a whole lot of them with a whole lot of stories to tell with very little skill to back it up. And I've met my fair share. I have zero interest in these people. It's not my style to go confront them. But again, Dan was asked to show up, so he did. So if the people who don't like that, then don't invite people over and don't challenge them to show up. Don't like they say in the United States, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Moving on, I mean, a lot of the critics that I saw were online. I've got one student in particular who really enjoys sending me links to forums online, and a little bit less nowadays, but he used to send me for years on it. Look what they say about you, look what they say about Dan. And I've actually, one of my American friends, he asked me about that very, very tentatively at first, but, he had heard some negative things about Dan, and I replied, my standard reply right now is that, look, have you ever trained with him? Have you ever met him? No. But okay, so the only thing you really have is hearsay, what other people say about him for their own reasons. And the only thing you can know besides that is whatever he wrote in articles and books and so on, which is fine. There's a place for you to criticize him on those things. That said, what I can say is that I actually have met him numerous times, talked to him, have trained with him, and can verify that his skill is actually real, that he can back it up what he says. If you've never crossed hands with him, then I think you don't really know, you're not in a place to judge all that much, let alone that you've trained with him, that you understand what he teaches. So there was a lot of criticism that I saw, which basically came from people who were not really in a position to do that, to give that criticism from actual experience with the man himself. What I can say, Dan was always very kind to me, very generous in his teaching. So that was my experience. And anybody who has a different experience, well, that's on your end. Not much I can say about that. So moving on, what was it like, Dan, as a martial artist? I've stated before more than once that he was one of the few people that I've met in my life that I would call a master. He always preferred that you call him Dan, but I would have no problem calling him master, because he deserved it for many reasons. I talked about this seminar in which he kind of tested me, and one of the things we did was freestyle pushing hands. Again, the point is to break your partner's balance without losing your own. The only thing, the way that I can describe that, what it was like a slow motion tidal wave, just crushing you very slowly until you lost your balance. That's what happened to me all the time. So we did freestyle pushing hands. Whatever I did, it didn't work. Whatever I did, he used against me. And the way he did it was very slowly, very gently. I never felt brute strength. It was like pushing into, again, like a gigantic pillow that if you push against it, it yields a little bit, but it doesn't go away, and it keeps coming forward, and eventually you go off balance. He did that in slow motion. He did that at will. He could do it in a few seconds. That we crossed hands, we started, and just like 3 seconds later, I was on the ground. Or he could just stand there, and I would get nowhere, and then 30 seconds later, he'd do a move, and I'd be off balance. So I've never met anybody who came close to that high level of pushing hand skill. So that was the first thing. The second part was, we did another drill, a pushing hands drill called reeling silk. In the drill, too long to explain, but in the drill, the point is to maintain contact with the arms and the hands of your partner while you try to land elbows and forearms to the chest. Why to the chest? Because if you do it to the face, everybody gets beat up to a little bit too much and gets damaged. The idea is that we're going to try to get to the chest, where we can actually take an impact a little bit better than to the head, so that we don't have to pull our techniques all that much. So we were doing that. It's a moving drill, so you move around, there's footwork, but you try to maintain that contact and absorb the techniques of your partner, divert them, counter, or attack yourself. At one point, then took a step forward and pushed with one arm. I was in contact with that arm. I was able to maintain my structure so that my arm didn't collapse, the rest of my body didn't either. but he pushed with so much strength that I was sliding back across the floor on my feet. Not stepping back, sliding back. So he pushed my entire body weight with what looked like to me just an almost bored effort, like, okay, I'm going to push this guy back, and I go back, and that was it. And I was doing all I could just not to collapse under that stress of that, the strength of his technique. So that was another realization. To this day, I have not been able to replicate that with anybody. But the other really, again, another eye-opening moment for me was, and I've mentioned this story before. So the point of the drill is trying to land elbows and forearms on the chest. So I was like, I'm getting nowhere with my attacks, so let's try something new. So I did a collapsing elbow that I learned from Pencak Silat. And it's I made contact, and then the way it works, long explanation short, is that there's actually zero pressure on the arm of my partner, Dan's arm in this case, but I'm using it as a fulcrum to rotate around, that my elbow comes point first towards his chest. Now, I've done this technique, I had done that technique many times before at that time and landed it. So I know what it feels like when you get through, when you're like, all right, I'm in, it's going to land. I had that exact feeling. And just at the moment that I was going to hit him in the chest with my elbow, then blurred over to my left side. He literally, like, it looked like he was teleporting, and I get just launched towards my right side. So it was from going very, very slowly. He just accelerated tremendously and did the exact perfect counter against that technique. And I was just off balance, just getting launched away several meters over off to the side. Again, to this day, I have no idea how to replicate that. It's not that I haven't tried to figure it out, but and he wasn't angry or anything. He was just like, oh, okay, this guy came close. Okay, that's we need to act. And just fraction of a second, it was all over for me. So had he wanted to hurt me, he could have very easily done that. So that was for me also a very important moment to feel what it was like to do this drill with somebody of such an incredibly high level. There were many moments like that over the years. Now, I think as a martial artist, the best way to describe Dan maybe was like the calm before a storm. Meaning he would walk around slowly, relaxed. He didn't move with jerky, fast movements. He was very controlled. There were no excesses in his movements. His whole body was always connected with each movement. But as I just explained, he could accelerate explosively at a moment's notice and in all directions, which is one of the features of his style, is that you learn to move in different directions as opposed to just in front of you where you hope that the opponent will be. He's one of the very few people that I found who can use Tai Chi Chuan effectively for self-defense and teach a system that not only makes sense, but also makes good tactical decisions from the very first class onwards. Like class 1, you start, you immediately get fundamental principles explained to you, what is in many styles considered secret or advanced knowledge. You get that from day 1. And it works out of the box, but obviously as you train more, it works better and better, and you can do more advanced stuff. But the point is, when I compared it to what I knew back then about Tai Chi when I just got started, what I saw a bunch of really well-known Tai Chi teachers do, and they call that self-defense, my thoughts were like, this doesn't make any sense. You're just standing there in front of this guy, all this talk about using his force against him. What you're doing is just, you've got such great body mechanics that you're just in reality, in practicality, stronger than the other guy because your body mechanics are so great, and that's what allows you to do what you're doing. But tactically speaking, it's like, you know, if you're not that teacher, it's going to be very difficult to replicate what he's doing effectively when somebody really wants to. punch your head in. Whereas from dance style, what we learned, it was immediately first class is footwork, evasion, don't consist the opponent's strength, timing, distancing, all these things were immediately addressed. So that was a very stark contrast. And that was the first time I experienced somebody teaching a style that was very coherent in not just the way that it worked, again, all the components working together, but at the same time, in that it's just something that you can actually learn. You didn't need to be an incredible athlete to be good at it. So that's one aspect. So I'm trying to cover all the bases here. One aspect is Dan's humor. He had a very dry sense of humor that had me in stitches many times. So many things that I could share. There was this one time many years ago, this is decades ago, where when the internet started getting more popular, and there was a guy who had like a video online about Tai Chi. It wasn't very good, and he said something that, well, if you do Tai Chi the wrong way, you will become gay. And I told Dan about that article, and he laughed a little bit, he grinned. And I said, look, Dan, because we do mirror form, maybe we should be worried about that actually everybody's going to become gay if we do mirror form, because we're probably doing it wrong according to this guy here on the internet. So Dan laughed a little bit, and then maybe an hour later during the seminar, he came back as I was training what he showed, and he said, we also do reverse form. So I'm sure that is going to level out whatever gayness that you might get if you do it wrong according to that guy. And he grinned and he walked off. So that was the kind of thing that happened a lot, is where he just come back with this video retort. There was one time when I went to a seminar in Germany, and I was freshly divorced. I had a girlfriend at the time who came with me, and after the first seminar day, we were supposed to meet up for dinner. The girlfriend was a little bit unhappy about that, and she wanted to spend dinner together and this and that. So I said, okay, we'll just have dinner, the two of us. So the day after, I show up for the second day, and Nan says, "Oh, I didn't see you at dinner." I explained it, and I said, "Look, I just wanted her to be happy," and he laughed a little bit, and then he said, "There's a Chinese saying, and it is, the desires of women are like the Tao, endless." And then he grinned, and that was all he said about that. And I've been using that phrase for a while now. So there was another part when I went to a seminar in Paris, and afterwards the seminar was over. I said, "So you want to go have a drink?" And I said, "Okay, let's go have a drink." And we you have to imagine, this is many years ago, but we are walking down, basically we're getting to the point in Paris where it's not the banlieue, so it's not yet the suburbs, but we're getting pretty close to it. It's kind of like the twilight zone in between Paris proper and the suburbs, where you really shouldn't go all that much if you don't belong there, in my opinion. Just to give you an idea, we were the only white guys walking around the street. We go to a bar, Dan asks in perfect French for a beer. We get refused service. We get told that they don't have any beer. We get hard looks, and we say, "Okay, we're out of here." So we went into this bar a little bit further on. That was fine. Spent a long time talking and drinking and having a good time. And I asked at one point, "Dan, why did you leave the police force in Hong Kong?" And he looked at me and he said, "Well, I figured that if you find yourself strangling your immediate superior with your belt, maybe it's time to leave." And I laughed. I said, "Yeah, that makes sense to me." So there's so much more, but he had a very nice sense of humor. He had a very dry sense of humor that I very much appreciated. a lot more of these stories, and I'm sure many of the folks who knew him have similar stories to tell. And this is a part that I think, you know, especially his detractors don't know of. So, and I wanted to share that too. What did I learn from then, apart from Tai Chi? Many different things. On a technical level, um, when he was teaching, he'd come over and he'd say, that's not quite right, which was Dan speak for you're doing it wrong. But it's so much more, um, it's more positive to hear it said that way. That's not quite right, as opposed to, what you're doing is really bad. Stop it. This is horrible. Which is maybe what he was thinking, but he didn't say it like that. At one point, I was doing the form, and he just walked up to me and said, "Your form is dead." And he showed me what I meant. I was doing snake ribs down, and it was about timing, rhythm, breathing life into the form. He showed me, this is what you're doing, and then he did the move again. This is what you should be doing to breathe life into your form. And then he walked off. And I spent the next year trying to apply that lesson to my training, and have done ever since. So with just one sentence, he could completely turn around what I was doing with the training. One of the things he said is to ask questions. He always, at the end of seminars or during seminars, said, like, are there any questions? And he basically said, like, if you don't ask questions, people will fill in the blanks themselves. And he had many stories of people not asking questions, and then later on coming with explanations that he said, no, that's completely wrong. It has nothing to do with it. Or I never taught you that. So he was very much open as a teacher, and I tried to be the same. I always tell my students, ask. My private students as well. It's like, if you have questions, ask. Don't hesitate. But one of the more important stories was the Mike Martello incident. A little bit of backstory. Many years ago, there was an American Chinese martial artist, Mike Martello, who lived in Belgium, and he showed up one time at an open mat session that I organized with a friend. A friend of mine did Shui Jiao, Chinese wrestling. I did Tai Chi, and we said we're going to organize an open event. Anybody can join us, and the only thing we do is Chinese wrestling on the one side of the mat, and on my side we did free step pushing hands. So just kind of like sparring sessions, but or wrestling sessions, if you will, but in a very amicable sense, and everybody was just always chill and having a good time and just exchanging and getting to practice with people from different styles. So I did the freestyle pushing hands, and my buddy did the shui jiao. I show up to open class. It was in my school, and Mike Martello's there. I recognized him, and first thing he said to me is like, "Do you know who I am?" That's how he opened the conversation. I said, "Yep." Okay. And second thing he asked is, "Do you know, these are my two teachers. There were two Chinese gentlemen there. Yeah, we're here to help and see if, what you're doing and blah, blah, blah." I'm like, "Okay, everybody's welcome." And said, "So do you speak Chinese?" I said, "No, just a little bit, not that much." Long story short, everybody shows up, and Mike and his Chinese teachers are talking off to the side by themselves, relatively loud, not paying any attention to the explanation that I was giving. So they didn't know what was going to happen, but they weren't very interested. So I pointed it out at one point, and then his reply very loudly so they all could hear, "No, we are here to help." I'm like, "Okay, well, do your own thing then, stand off to the side." And what I learned afterwards is that he walked up to my friend, the co-organizer, and said, "Look, it's clear that the level of everybody here is very low, so it's better that my teachers take over." And he basically wanted to take over the whole event with his teachers. I didn't know about that. What I did see is that one of his teachers, his Shui Jiao teacher, came onto the mat with one of the students of my friend, and I'm just going to show a technique. He said this and that, and then he did what you really don't do in Shui Jiao, which is throw somebody and dive on top of them. It's typically what you don't do. So my friend said to his student, go ahead. And his student, basically did a really hard throw and threw that teacher to the ground very, very hard. And that teacher rolled off to the side and didn't step on the mat again. Mike showed up when I was doing pushing hands, and he seemed to be surprised that he said, "Oh, you have a very strong root," meaning that I'm very stable. And he could seem to not be able to get over that. And then it basically quickly ended when my friend's teacher, Master Zumu, who was basically the one who introduced Shui Jiao in Europe, showed up because he was very supportive of my friend, and Mike Martello and his teachers were like, "Whoa, this guy, why is he here?" And he says, "Oh, that's my student." And obviously Master Zumu basically outranked them. And very quickly afterwards, they left without saying goodbye. Now, so that's what they did was very disrespectful. But again, my friend told me afterwards, because he knows me, because I would have just said that, "Okay, you want to take over? Okay, step onto the mat. This is my school. You want to take over? Step onto the mat. Let's see what you've got." You want to be very disrespectful? Okay, then the doors close, and please teach me a lesson. Or you can leave. But I don't go taking over anybody else's event. Why should you do this to me in front of my students? So I only knew about it afterwards, and I talked to my buddy. I said, "Look, well, this is very this is very disrespectful." So we're never letting Mike and his teachers in anything that we do. Funny thing, the day after, one of his students of Mike called me and started with like, "Yeah, it's very clear that the level of Chinese martial arts is very low in Belgium. So maybe it would be interesting if you could and your students join us with all the seminars that Mike's teachers will give." And I said, "That's very strange. I saw Mike yesterday, and he didn't mention it to me." And his student was flabbergasted, and the phone call very quickly ended. So that happened. And I think about a year later, I was at a seminar or competition with Dan, I don't remember. And he said, "Do you know Mike Martello?" And I said, "Yes, that guy is a douchebag." Use different wording, but you know what I mean. And he said, "How so?" And I explained the whole situation to Dan, and he said, "Yeah, that is indeed disrespectful." But I said, "Look at it this way." Because he spoke very highly of you. Dan had seen Mike at a demo somewhere, I think it was in the Netherlands. And he said, "Oh, I like Mike's, his Chinna stuff was interesting. He's very nifty with his locks." And when I introduced myself and they talked, and he said that he spoke very highly of me. I said, "Look, I can't reciprocate because of what he did." And Dan said, "Look, try to see it from his side. I'm not saying that this is what happened, but his Chinese teachers, 99% of the people they see in China who come to China from the West to learn, like us Westerners going to China to learn, the large majority of those people are not very good. So their impression is that all the Westerners are crap at Chinese martial arts. And they get the impression that they just show up over here, do a truckload of seminars, and make a lot of money and get a lot of students that way. So he said, there's a good likelihood that Mike was pressured by his teachers to set all that stuff up, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's okay for him to act like that, but he says there's a different side to that story. So a long story, but the reason why I mentioned is that Dan, who has experienced Nok School, as we call it, himself as well, and had to handle it, it's not like he doesn't know how that works. But he could have said, Martello is an asshole, so you should have beat his ass, or it's a good thing that you now know what he's like, and so on. No, he was very. He tried to give a balanced answer. He tried to show a potential other side of the story that was more compassionate than I was at that point towards Mike. And that was a good lesson to me, because it's one of the lessons that stuck with me, and always looking for, maybe there's more to the story than the initial gut reaction. When somebody wrongs you, maybe immediately sticking to the only thing that is behind this is malice, or anything else that is negative. Maybe there's a different side to that story as well. And I think that was a very important life lesson that I learned from him. So this podcast is getting really long, so I'm going to wrap it up. Dan's gone now. Practical Tai Chi Chuan International will continue. I will continue teaching. I expect all the other teachers to do the same. I'm sure there will be lots of questions from students, but I don't think the time's for that right now. The information I have is that Dan made his wishes very clear as to what was supposed to happen after he passed. I would think that now is a good time for everybody to be patient and give the family, his children, the time they need to deal with all this. And I'm sure they will eventually notify everybody as to what Dan's wishes were, and then we can go on with that. And now's the time to be respectful, and just to keep on training and teaching like I think Dan would have liked us to do. So that's what I see for the future, and maybe in parting, for all the people that are still listening, Chris Wilder, friend of the show here, contacted me privately, and he said that he'd very recently gone through the same thing, losing his teacher, and he wrote, "We should pity those that never have known such a relationship. You are the fortunate ones." And that is how I remember Dan. It's been one of my great fortunes in life to find him as a teacher. First, my own teacher, Patrick Couder, and via him, then Dan. Without Dan, Patrick wouldn't be my teacher, and I would never have met either one of them. So I'm very fortunate to have found him, and I don't know where I would be now without all the time and energy and passion and dedication that Dan put into teaching Tai Chi Chuan. Not to me, but to everybody all over the world, and all the work he already did all these decades long. So in that regard, I think if we focus on that, and I'm speaking to my fellow Tai Chi brothers and sisters, if we can focus on that, then I think that would make him the most proud of us and the most happy with the way that we continue to further his teaching and to pass on the art correctly as he was doing with us. That's it. That was all I have to say. It's quite a lot. I'm sure there's more, but I think I covered a more nuanced picture. That's what I wanted to give, a nuanced picture of Dan, and the many things that I learned from him, and hopefully that helps some of you out there listening to this. I'll put links to everything I mentioned, Dan's website, his books, and so on, in the show notes. Again, wimsblog.com/72, number 72. They'll be there. And if you're looking for Dan's material, then it's going to be very easy to find if you check it out there. Right, folks, that's it. Thanks for listening. Like I mentioned, there will be regular episodes following soon, and hope you find those useful as well. Thank you. Take care.